Hello, everyone. This is Leah. I am here today with Rachel Penner to discuss some stuff for our blog on Fastfrwrd. Fastfrwrd is currently doing a series of episodes of podcast slash text translation or transcript. And what we're talking about is colonialism and capitalism. The IPCC just recently released a paper, like literally after I came up with this idea. So it's like my idea, not joking. But before I came up with this topic, the IPCC released a few days after I started talking about it, a whole entire report about the linkages between colonialism and climate change and talking about the causal factors there. So I'm here to talk to a lady who might have some perspective because she said that she specializes in translating complexity to clarity and working towards a more equitable, just, and resilient world. So here we are with Rachel Penner from Rachel Penner Consulting, where she thinks everything is communication. So we're going to talk about climate and colonialism and white guilt and all this stuff. How are you doing, Rachel?
Hi, Alea. Thank you so much for talking about this important and complex issue with me. Just to locate myself, I am a white settler. I'm currently living in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, on the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I bring a perspective of somebody who is disabled, neurodivergent, but also with the privilege of being white and of being quote unquote middle class, although that could also be a discussion because apparently there is no middle class anymore.
Well, thank you for situating yourself, Rachel, and RIP to the middle class. So basically, the conversation that we're trying to broach here is about the story of whiteness, the story of colonialism, the story of poverty, the story of inequality, the story of race and ethnicity and creed and all these things that divide and also unite. All of these things are packaged in a storytelling. And I just want to make sure that there's enough nuance to make it a gripping story, because it's okay to make a black and white analysis of things, but there is more than just black and white people, aren't there? So in the same sense, because there's more than just black and white people, and also black people are just very dark brown, and some white people look darker than some black people that I know. So the thing is that it's nuanced. Society and reality is nuanced. So how do we translate this nuance to the story that we're telling? The current story that I see is that the global north tries to take a responsibility for what it's done, but they also want to save themselves. So it's basically they say, yeah, we did this really bad thing with the climate, and it's got a lot of legacy history from slavery carried over into colonialism, carried over into from feudalism, carried over from our whole history of settler colonialism, starting with the Romans and even before that with the Egyptians, everybody, just spanning all of human modern civilization, basically. And then you try to distill this whole entire story into something that is coherent and nuanced and clearly telling a clean and truthful narrative. This narrative talks about the global north overdoing its bit in terms of consumption and the global south suffering for it. Then you have the situation where the fixes are being proposed by the global north, who are trying to help their hyperconsumption to become something that can just magically stay fully intact without degrowth, if possible, by just having the overconsumption be of green things, and green things will magically be circular and just magically not have anything that has to do with entropy, and just like, defy the laws of entropy, defy the laws of physics, and just keep the wheels turning perfectly because it's all green and gravy. So I've talked a lot. It's a big introduction, but in the end, Rachel, you're all about storytelling for equitable climate justice. So can we look at the stories we tell about whiteness and development that are unraveling currently? Because these stories of what development means come down from the people who tell us they are civilized. And the people who talk the most about civilization and being civilized have been, in the past, little bit of history here, mostly white. They talk about civilization as the definition that they have created. And I say they, but I mean some. And so this definition that's being handed down is what is called development. You are a developed nation or you are a developing nation if you are approximating whiteness or approximating some kind of conquer culture. Because Japan figures into the civilization story, China to an extent, but not really, mostly Japan, because China is a worker colony, basically. Oh my god. But Japan is a civilizational nation. Europe is a civilizational continent. North America is a civilizational continent if you're white. These are the stories that we've told. So this is a big preamble, but what are the stories that you see being told, Rachel? And are they helping to define or unravel what whiteness and development actually mean?
This conversation is happening at an interesting time. Here in the province of BC, we just had an election, a provincial election, the results of which are not yet known because the race is so close. But an event that is, I think, quite reflective of what is happening globally, reflective of our times, and happening at this intersection of what we're talking about here: whiteness, colonialism, climate. We have seen here in BC, as is being seen everywhere, rise of the far right, a normalization towards, moving towards a normalization of fascism and of those the xenophobic, misogynistic, ableist beliefs all tied into that. And I believe this is coming out of predominantly fear. We have gone through some very scary times, and we are still in scary times, very uncertain times. From the pandemic we're still in, from extreme financial insecurity, increasing inflation, and increasing the increasing gap between the wealthy and everyone else. And then, of course, the impacts of climate change and the climate crises we're in. Here in BC in particular, we are facing extreme weather events. In the past 5 years, we have broken multiple records for wildfires. And this is impacting First Nations, predominantly First Nations in the province, who frequently lack the resources to respond to these issues. But also what's happening is that a lot of white populations are being impacted by these things as well, climate in particular. Climate, and also let's extrapolate that into industry as well, right? The resource extraction industries, again, speaking here specifically in BC, logging and forestry, well, we're running out of trees to log because the industry has been mismanaged. And because of that white colonial perspective, of take. And what's happening is these rural, poorer, white communities are being hard hit, and the narrative, as we're talking about stories and narrative and the stories being told, the stories being told aren't these stories of colonialism and we've made these mistakes and now this is the natural outcome of what our approach and mental model has been of the past 100 years. No, that's not what's being talked about in response to these communities suffering. What's being talked about is the government is controlling too much, or First Nations are trying to take your land, or just these other narratives that play into, again, the fear, the scarcity, and just the inability to make changes from a holistic perspective.
Whoa, I didn't know anything about the elections happening in Canada, but the Trudeau administration has been very forthcoming and very accommodating as it relates to resituating history where it needs to be, where you talk about First Nations people, and then you talk about the settler community and the land on which you are. Like, this is a new thing where how you introduce yourself, for example, is a new thing since the Trudeau administration, where you literally address where the land that you live on came from. I think that nod of, I don't know what it would be, respect. Yeah, respect. Already says something different about how times have changed in a positive direction, where you have a lot of people who try to acknowledge where the land came from. And I'm not sure what more we should ask of people, except that, inequalities just stop. Maybe that'd be nice. We don't need to acknowledge where the land came from if people aren't being sequestered in unusable land anymore. Maybe they will give up that privilege of no longer being acknowledged as First Nations if you can just give them first class citizen rights. But that was my little spiel. So people were once nomadic and now they are not. I would say this is largely due to drawing borders and territories following colonization, which separated people according to kind. I believe in a free world, a world free of borders. To correct this, bureaucracies may remain, but borders should be free. That's my opinion. Is this on the radio? This question, I don't want to speak for people, but I would say with you, for example, thinking about the just how you feel about this topic, Kersdon. Thinking about the legacy of borders and what that means. It was to divide up nations and continents to suit the colonizer narrative. And we still have these hand-me-downs. And we're seeing this climate catastrophe happening over and over around the world in different manifestations, and people are unable to necessarily flee from it because this concept of borders remains. So not only is the colonial legacy that we have climate change, but we also have the colonial legacy of borders that stop you from running away from the climate change. So the beast creates the problem, and then also creates the method for keeping you trapped in the problem and away from getting rescue from this problem. Is a borderless world too much of a step for some to digest, regardless of its rectitude? The world belongs to all of us, and ideally you can block your home, but you cannot block transit, at least you shouldn't. But do you think that a borderless world is possible when the colonial mindset and story and virus persists?
Just in regards to the Trudeau administration, I would say there's been a bit more of a mixed record in regards to treatment of and behavior towards Indigenous folks, but that is not my area of expertise, so I'll just leave it at that. And to consider this question, is a borderless world possible? While the colonialist mindset persists, I don't think so. Because it's about power and control. The border is about power and control. And we can see with the wars that are currently happening, Russia invading Ukraine, Israel bombing. I don't even know what the latest is of where they are all bombing. Again, these fight over borders and this colonialist, extractive mentality of power over. However, as you point out, climate is making those borders more noticeable in how some people are fighting even harder to reinforce them, such as what is happening quite strongly in Europe. And yet also it's showing us kind of how irrelevant they are in some ways when it comes to the climate crisis. With the perfect example being last summer of how the wildfires in Canada that were so intense led to air quality alerts in New York and other parts of the United States. I mean, the smoke was global, not just last year, but other years where fires in Siberia, the smoke has affected populations far, far away from that, where the actual fire was. The smoke is borderless. The climate crisis is borderless. And so I think that, I do think that this is going to be a tension point. Borders will be a tension point as the climate crisis only increases. Its impacts only increase and become worse and become harder. And I will also, again, point back to the numbers of Indigenous peoples, and I know primarily here in Canada, US, but who have also been negatively impacted by these kind of arbitrary borders, right? Like that many different groups had lands in both what is now Canada and what is now the United States. And I think that, again, some of those groups probably understand a borderless world more so than some of the rest of us.
The opposite of colonial manifest destiny would probably be a degrowth mentality. So what are ways we can weave narratives and appeal to those who are raised to revere the products of colonialism, like, achieving massive success with money, achieving massive land grabs, etc. How do you help people who are raised this way to revere this and to celebrate this on some level? And these are the people who are not going to automatically fit into the degrowth mindset. How do we get them on board?
I think one of the first things we have to do is try to understand their emotional and psychological experience. Because if we don't meet these people where they are at, they're not going to join us in this journey of degrowth, in this journey of trying to create and build new systems and new ways of being in the world that don't rely on this extraction and consumption mindset. So I think there's a need to understand them, understand their fears, and just speaking to the current state of where a lot of people are at is this insecurity around the basics of life and not having enough money to buy food, to pay rent, to get our needs for health met. People are worried about their families, their children. So how can we acknowledge those incredibly valid concerns and fears first and validate them? And I think it's only from that place of a person feeling seen, feeling understood, feeling validated, that then there might be openness to what is the next step forward. And this validation and acknowledgement of a present state doesn't require simultaneously agreeing with perhaps their perspectives on that, just that mindset of like being in consumer culture and buying more and gotta buy stuff and these visible markers of success, house, car, white picket fence, all these things. We can validate that they might still want those things without necessarily agreeing that that's the right way to go. But bringing it back to the fears and insecurities and worries about just being able to survive in this really challenging state that we're currently in. I think this is the area exactly where communications broadly as a field is so critical, because communications has the opportunity to connect with people. And again, going back to the first comment about the present state of BC in our election and the rise of the far right and fascism, it's because they are speaking the language of these emotions that people are caught in the grip of, the fear of not having money to survive, to live, or of only scraping by. What about quality of life? What about doing more than just surviving? And so communications, how we communicate, what we say, there's a challenge for us as communicators, speaking of my field and my industry, to rise to this challenge of speaking in the language of these people rather than just trying to say this way is the right way. Like, why can't you look around and see how bad the impacts of climate change are with all of these catastrophes? Like, just get on board and do this. And even though we might want to do that, and speaking for myself, even though there are certain instances where I absolutely do want to say that message, the reality is that if we want some of these people on board with us that love many things about the consumer and capitalist way of doing life, then we have to be willing to meet them where they're at.
Okay, so we meet people where they're at. We have an open approach. Cool. Here's a quandary. I have a workshop I'm preparing to do, and people attending the workshop in order to perhaps find a livelihood in sustainability will likely propose raising chickens as a suitable job based on its accessibility for people who are poor, who don't have huge swaths of land or a factory, who may not be fully literate, who may not be tech savvy. I oppose animal rearing. I have come to understand that the animals want to live, and it's not my right to impose my taste buds on a life. So, how do we reconcile this fact that status quo, emerging from colonial habits of overconsumption and all the machinery it takes to feed that, literally and metaphorically? How do we confront that? Once upon a time, people would slaughter for their needs or their community's needs. Now, success is if you slaughter for a region or a nation's needs. So, if these people in my workshop succeed at chicken rearing, it will only be to murder more and more effectively, if also carbon neutral. So the question is this: when people have some instant gratification from the post colonial world that still bears marks of its maker, how do we navigate that?
I think one way to approach this is to stay in a place of curiosity, in a place of dialogue, and also find the thing in yourself and or in this kind of theoretical situation, in this, in the relationship with others, find the place where you do have shared values, or where it is that you're actually working towards the both of you. If you disagree on something, what is that place that you do agree on or can work together on? Because I don't think I don't think we're just going to arrive at that place just like that. As you're talking about, there are still, as we're moving through this transition, or as we're trying to get to a place of post-colonialism, or get to a place, an alternative way of being in the world, the transition is going to be long, and there's going to be difficulties along the way, and we're not going to instantly see eye to eye on all the issues. So if we can find a place of saying, well, community is important, so I'm going to keep staying in relationship with these people even though they're doing this thing I disagree with. I know that at the core they are kind people, or they're whatever it is that the values are that are important to you. Or maybe it's about a certain outcome that is really important to you, which is zero carbon. So maybe you can focus on that and say, okay, well, right now we're not doing it in the way that we want, but maybe eventually we'll get to that zero carbon in the way I want as well. And sort of see, I guess what I'm trying to say is like seeing it as points along the way in the process and being open to that, and then finding within yourself what are your limits, how far can you go, and maybe it is at some point that no, I can't support that, therefore I'm not going to be in relationship with these people because it's beyond my limits or what I have capacity to navigate. So it's that curiosity, staying curious, seeing it as points along the way, realizing that we're in transition, and then also finding those limits within yourself and staying true to that, but hopefully not at the expense of ruling something out just because. Like making sure that each of us goes through that journey of curiosity, and maybe we still come back to that original choice that we made, that original decision we had, and maybe we change our minds along the way. I think it's the process piece that's the important part.
Okay, Rachel, thank you so much. Finally, the last question I would want to ask is, how would you rewrite the script if you had the chance to just, be world dominator? We have a game coming out with Fastfrwrd called Sedition State Ecology, where you play a dictator of an island, supporting green initiatives, whether they are benevolent or tyrannical. tyrannical, however you say that. So you have the choice between benevolent dictatorship or tyrannical dictatorship. How would you rewrite the story if you were the benevolent dictator or the tyrannical one? How would you rewrite history going forward into the climate future?
You've ended this with a very difficult question for me, Alea. I find that I'm getting caught up in all of these other thoughts around being a dictator. But let me just, see if I can provide somewhat of an answer to the question. If I were in charge, what would I do? And where I would focus my efforts is on changing the way people think about the world and about their place in the world. And it's shifting that colonialist, extractive, power over mindset right there at its foundation. That mindset, that framework of how we see the world, of literally man over nature, or man separate from nature, and I'm choosing the word man very deliberately and very specifically. It's that is the place where if we change that, it's going to naturally change all of the actions, the behaviors, the outputs, the what it is that we do, how we move in the world is going to change based on how we see the world and how we think about the world. So I'll trying to keep it simple. This very difficult question you've posed to me. I'll try to keep it simple with that answer about changing the narrative, changing the mindset at the very core of how we look at the world around us.
Okay, Rachel, I have taken up your time and your patience way too much. This interview was a bitch to get at, people, because I was at this location to do a workshop, the beginning of my workshop, and the location has historically bad Wi-Fi, and then the power went out, and we were on generators, and I was using my data, and my data doesn't pick up very well there. So then we've been sending voice notes back and forth to each other, and I'm going to record the voice notes and piece it together and make a transcript and everything. So it's been complicated, but it's been worth it. Why? Because it helps me to know that there are other people who are thinking this way, and they are not sharing my skin color, so it's not anything biased. I appreciate your time and your patience and your point of view, Rachel. I too am neurodiverse. I too am in the climate space. I too care about climate communication. So it's like looking in a Canadian mirror. And basically, I would want to leave with these following words, which is that it is no longer the fact of life that the victor writes the story. Once upon a time, perhaps, because the victor was a writing class of people, they would write stuff, and then you had the people who were conquered who would tell stuff orally. Nowadays, everybody writes. And everybody can record a video, and everybody can record an audio clip, and everybody can publish on social media. You might get shadow banned, that's different, but everybody has access to this stuff at the beginning, and then you have to fuck it up for yourself. So we have something like freedom from having the victor tell the story these days. I wouldn't say that we've completely escaped, because then there is like who funnels what media to you, who prioritizes what stories you get. But it's a little bit different these days. And that's what's always interesting about talking about history and then talking about now, is that it's a little bit different these days. And that's why I'm not feeling so bothered that I'm talking about colonialism with a white lady. Sorry to call you a white lady, Rachel, but this is very diminishing all the other things that you are. But I get to reflect on the world with people who are world thinkers, world citizens, and not just focus solely on their camp and what their camp did or did not do. And in this sense, I feel that it is different. We get to say that it's different. And because it's different and because it's new, we get to rewrite the script totally with the base material. So basically, we just have all this written shit, and we just switch around the words and place them in the order. And that's the metaphor, that's the analogy. That history has given us all this material. We have 1.1 teratons of human-made stuff on this planet. And it's about remixing and regurgitating and then finding something new. And that new stuff should be fun, and that new stuff should be inclusive, and that new stuff should be without bullies. That new stuff should be like twinkly twinkly stars. So Rachel, again, thank you for coming on this. I don't even know what to call it because it's like not really a podcast. It's more like an audio interview for a series. So it's not necessarily a podcast, but I don't care. It's like freeform. And yeah, that's about it from me. If you want to leave a final word, I'll let you. But otherwise, thank you so much. And I hope you're having a good evening. And I haven't taken up too much of your time. It even rained. Can I tell you? It was raining. So I was like, I can't record while it's raining. Oh my God. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of stuff. People podcasting is like easy, but it's not that easy. Okay.
Hi, Alea. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And also, I'm most definitely white, and I am also female, so your description to me absolutely applies. And also, it's not that I bring forward necessarily anything new that doesn't already exist out there in the world, but at the same time, what I think is this coming together in this space, you and I coming together in this space and delving into these questions, delving into these different issues that are so intense right now in the world. I think just the act of doing that increases our ability, increases our capacity to realize this new world, this other world, this different way of being in the world that people like you and I want to see come to life. And in the urgency of our present time, the climate crisis and the extreme weather events, the rise of the far right, all these other things that are coming together at this moment in time, we can still enter into this dialogue of knowing that we're not alone, of supporting each other to continue in this journey and continue in this attempt to realize something better, something more just, something more equitable. So, yes, thank you to you for creating this series, podcast, interviews, whatever this series is, and for having me participate in it. Thank you.